Well, welcome back to the Art Business Podcast. My name's David Bellingham. I'm Programme Director of the MA in Art Business at Southern Institute of Art in London. On this show, we usually look at the art market from the dealer, advisor, or institutional side of the table. Today, we're flipping that. My guest built his business education entirely from the artist side, pricing his own work, budgeting a creative practice, and eventually founding Artonomics, a platform dedicated to giving other artists the financial literacy that art schools rarely teach: pricing, budgeting, royalties, and protecting their intellectual property. Certainly true in London, by the way. He's also just published a book on the subject called Artonomics, The Business of Ideas. So please welcome Halim Flowers. Halim, you're very welcome on the podcast.
Great to meet you. Honored to be here, signing in from Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
It's great to know where you're coming from. So, Halim, before we get into our Artonomics, just briefly for listeners who don't know your story, you began developing this business knowledge without formal training in art or business. And you spent 22 years in prison, turning to books, art, entrepreneurship, and self-education as a way of developing your thinking. How did that experience shape the way you now think about creativity, business, and opportunity?
For me, having an insurmountable amount of disposable time to study, it was a university for me. What I learned is the power of, controlling the narrative and the power to define in visual language, and the symbolism in speaking with colors is so important, and adding intrinsic value into communicating the human experience. So having that insurmountable amount of disposable time and to study economics, finance, business, and not just like criminal civil law, because I understood the dynamics of being in a carceral setting for decades. It really wasn't a legal matter, but more a financial matter. And so I just really wanted to learn the way that the world operated economically and financially. And through that study of economics and finance and business, I've learned that, financial engineering is a form of creativity and storytelling within itself, and the way in which we create value. And this is what artists do, but we create intrinsic value and not fiat currency and debt obligations. And so I was able to just to see the connection points in humanity through literature and the arts, but also through finance and fine art as well.
That's so interesting, and obviously quite a very unusual path into a world that's often seen as kind of, to a certain extent, still is elitist. I think that the the was there an idea that once your incarceration was finished, that by kind of looking at financial tools and understanding the business world, that it would equip you when you got out of prison to enter the real world and do something with it? Is that part of your reasoning?
Well, beginning in self-enterprise illegally at the age of 12.
Yeah.
And then starting a publishing company while I was inside and self-publishing 11 books. And I started writing the books at the age of 21 and got the publishing company going at the age of 24. And doing that for 14 years before I got out. And so for me, I had never had a job, and I've always been able to tap into my creativity. And just as a 12-year-old, the only reason I sold drugs illegally is because I had no frame of reference in my immediate community or household with people who were art dealers or poets or philosophers or professors or engage what we know to now as the creative economy. And so having the opportunity to study the Wall Street Journal extensively and engage with so many biographies and autobiographies of different philosophers and essayists and playwrights throughout history, I knew instinctively that, the world has an insatiable demand for cultural capital, and that it's highly, unregulated, and how it's not even formally evaluated, and that I believe that I had a perspective and a story and a talent that could add tremendous intrinsic value to the human experience. And I had the lived experience in business legally and illegally outside and inside, on top of taking collegiate courses while I was inside, that I feel like I can do it, and I could do it globally in a way that could last intergenerationally.
It sounds as though the prison was quite enlightened in the sense of giving you access. Did it have like its own library, or they sounds as though they were giving you access to these online, presumably external courses?
Only one of the institutions had formal collegiate credited courses. Rather, at that time, the carceral system in America was highly punitive, and it had no interest in rehabilitative services.
Hmm.
And for me, serving 2 life sentences at the age of 16, I was pretty much just wrote off. But I was fortunate to have a mom who worked at the Library of Congress. And so by my mom working at the Library of Congress, any congressional records, anything that had ever been copywritten that I wanted to access, all I would have to do was write or call my mom, and she could Xerox copy it and mail it to me. And then I started to take her position at the Library of Congress and to create like a think tank on the inside. And so any information that, people in my group, my study group, we would come up with, we would, get my mom to get it and get it mailed in, and we would create these like quasi think tanks.
That's amazing.
Mhm. But it
It's
wasn't
yeah,
initiated by the
by the
administration.
yeah, but they but
No,
so
it was
basically
self created.
yeah. So I guess you were on one level, all that they were doing was basically allowing you to have this material Xerox by your mum, and then you were allowed to read that in
Right.
the prison. That
I
so
had to
yes,
create my own curriculum.
yeah, that's
Mhm.
remarkable. And I assume that the three works of art on the wall behind you in the podcast for those people watching this on YouTube, I assume those are your work.
Yeah, this is a
Yeah,
triptych that I did earlier this year, yeah, during the winter storm in DC.
fantastic. And that leads, I think, people listening to this, we've spoken about the way you were self-educating when you were incarcerated, and your mum was really, really helpful on that, and that's great. And at least the prison allowed the material in. I can imagine some probably not even letting you do
Right.
that.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, they were. I just wanted to make sure that I was on do not disturb.
sure.
One sec. Yeah, they were they never stopped me from getting any information in. So that
That's
was a
good.
plus. That was a
Yeah, that's
plus.
good. But that's something. And ultimately, it was surely doing society a good a good
Hmm.
turn by the fact that well, we're sitting here having this conversation now. So
Hmm.
you know, and so I guess the question is, were you making art while you were incarcerated, or had you already been making art before you were imprisoned?
Never.
Never.
I never drew, I never sketched. I remember I
Wow.
wanted to start a fashion. It was an article I did on the Business Insider Journal while I was inside. And I was just in this article, I was like, once I come home, I wanted to be a entrepreneur, and I wanted to do my publishing, public speaking, and fashion. But even as when I was inside doing the fashion sketchings, I used to pay other incarcerated people to do the sketchings for me because I kept telling myself that I couldn't draw. And it wasn't until I got out in March 2019 and had an opportunity from March 2019 to March 2020, before the quarantine, the global quarantine, I had an opportunity to gauge art in every city where I would get paid to do public speaking. And that's when I learned that art is just not figurative portraits, right? It can be abstract or non-figurative. And that gave me the confidence to, once the quarantine came and we were all on lockdown, it gave me the confidence to transfer the philosophy and the poetry to the canvas through colors and symbolism.
Yeah, and I mean, just on a subjective reaction, the works behind you are really vibrant. There's color, there's some representational forms, but they work together really nicely as a triptych, if I might say so as well. And there's
Thank
obviously, to my eyes, there's quite a lot of like urban art or street art, as we might call it,
you.
involved in that. Was that kind of intentional? Had you
I've
seen
ne-
street? Yeah,
I've never been into visual art,
yeah,
mostly just writing. And so when I started to paint, my only reference was Basquiat. And
yeah.
so when I first signed to my art dealer in New York City, he asked me what was my visual language, and I couldn't answer that question at the time. But later on, I didn't want to embrace any pre-manufactured terminologies because I wasn't formally trained and I didn't want to like bind myself to fit into a certain term. And
Mm.
so just organically over time, I developed this practice that I call optical improvisation, meaning that it gives the physical eyes opportunity to improvise beyond the constructs that the brain confines and limits it to, and having an opportunity to experience the art through the visceral seeing more from the space of the heart and the soul and the feelings, and not what the brain conditions the eyes to see, which can be very limited because we can't see gamma rays and X-rays. But if we see with the heart and the soul and the emotional vision, then I feel like that type of improvisation can give the person that's experienced it a more deeper, visceral experience.
Have you ever spoken to anyone or worked with anyone that would see this as as a, a healing process? As there's a lot of use of art now for people with mental health problems, and maybe this notion of optical improvisation. It's a great phrase. It reminds me also of the jazz scene,
Bebop.
improvisation on yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
I just wonder whether you had any we might come to this maybe later on, but have you had
Mhm,
conversations with people maybe with mental health problems or social problems like you yourself had
mhm.
had?
I actually had a conversation with a child psychologist in Cleveland, Ohio, 10 minutes before this interview
Well,
about potentially partnering with one of my collectors has an organization, Why Not Families, that gives children therapy through the therapeutic, healing. And he wants to collaborate with me in the hospitals and the schools in Cleveland so that we can provide the children with the art as therapy, but then with Artonomics, we can provide them with a career path out of this practice. So it's just not a hobby. And for me, I'm also developing an app where it's those like a digital museum. So it's an array of emotions. And for each emotion is an original painting. And it's, you hear me talking about fear or anxiety or, joy, because we've now discovered through neuroscientific research that engaging with any form of creativity, especially visual art, is therapeutic.
no, that's another string to your bow, as it were. So
Mhm,
coming back to the kind of more business side, Forbes recently described your work in terms of, quote, weapons of mass construction.
mhm.
Great sort of punning statement. And your role as a, quote, cultural engineer. How do you see those ideas connecting with the business model you're building now? But I use the word building the business model because they were using these terms like engineering and
Mhm.
mass construction, which we think of the building at the building
Right.
industry.
Yeah, I hopefully be building this until I die. I have Picasso in front of me, doing his last self-portrait, I think at 93. And then with the adaptation of, AI blockchain technology, this is something hopefully I could live a long, long time into my 90s like my grandfather. And I definitely want to engineer into my last breath. I want to die empty. And for me, the weapons of mass construction in relation to the branding is that I see intuitively before any research reached me that art as a way of bringing together Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, whites and blacks, the rich and the poor. This is one of the privileges of being a cultural engineer. You engineer cultural assets, whether it's painting, poetry, philosophy, conversation, podcast interviews, sneakers, hoodies, and you create communities within these different cultural assets that you manufacture. And so these are weapons that build people, build happiness, build communities, and ultimately can build nations. And so I want to be a part of, engineering intergenerational wellness and building infrastructure and community around that will last, far after my transition from this three-dimensional experience that we call life.
That's wonderful again, and it's just it's it's sort of challenging the idea of the artist as someone who sits in a studio. Rich people come along and buy their work from, middlemen, middle women, the gallerists, and so on. That's the world that I mainly inhabit. So it's just really, really refreshing to see someone like yourself, I think, realizing that art, as we've seen, certainly in the new millennium, in London, we saw a huge uptake in people that you wouldn't normally see in art galleries were visiting Tate Modern.
Mhm.
There was something in the zeitgeist about people falling in love with art that was being made by not just dead artists, but living artists as well. So I think what you're doing is hopefully part of a bigger project that the magic of art is somehow bringing to us all, as it were.
Yeah, I think art has always been a contribution to the human family
Hmm.
that has matriculated through all classes of people. I just think that once we created a market out of it and we're able to bring artists, because most of the artists don't come from the elite, right?
Sure.
But they get brought into an elite circle. And I
Yes.
call this the gallery to museum pipeline, which has
Hmm.
been very kind to me. However, in the 21st century, social media and smartphones has democratized art in a way that is pulling a 20th century dynamic into an archaic valuation, and so in this 21st century, these next generation of people who we call collectors, they don't want to just, it's those before them, like the people who lived during the time of Warhol and Basquiat and Keith Haring and the London School of Art, the YBA, like
Mm.
their peers collected them. Their peers lift them up. I mean, of course, they probably were buying the dead artists like Pollock and, you know, the 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 impressionists of still, but people always want to have a relationship with an artist, right? And what I've discovered is I've been commissioned to do art for the Queen of England, her Platinum Jubilee celebration. And I've done art for the Princess of Norway at her wedding. I'm sitting at the table with the Princess and the Prince of Sweden. And what I've realized is that whether it's royal families, family offices, major corporate, executives, or drug dealers, homeless, middle class people, it is it is a mass it is an epidemic of unwellness, right?
Yep.
And what I've realized is having the privilege to sit with Princess Marta in Norway and to sit with a juvenile that's in a detention center.
Hmm.
When people connect with me through my art, whether it's this young person that maybe could only afford the hoodie, right? Or this princess who can afford an original painting at her wedding, they all want to just experience what it's like to be their authentic self and not to be this person, this persona of the princess or the prisoner. And I think we as artists, we give people an opportunity to be, just to be in that moment. And that's liberating to the princess and the prisoner. And me recognizing that and the tools that we have in the 21st century, I'm democratizing my practice and democratizing my studio practice to where as though understanding that I can create these cultural assets along all price points to democratize it to where everybody can be a part of this community. It's not collectives, it's community, right? And people want to be a part of this community. And so I'm giving them this community where we all just invested in intergenerational wellness.
Yeah, no, that's yeah. I mean, the I remember when when we started hearing about non fungible tokens, NFTs, and digital art. I did some searching on the web and for podcasts. This was seems like a long time ago now, and and the ones I was finding weren't by your typical wealthy art collectors, with a lot of cultural capital. The guys that were talking to one another were like me talking to you now, and
Hmm.
they were talking about, oh, I got this. They dropped sort of an edition of 10 of these digital works, and I got number one, man. And
Right.
and then the same podcast series was talking about drops of sneakers and that's when I realized that there was something new happening here. I think that
Mhm.
communities of people on social media were really enjoying sort of talking about art basically to one another
Mhm.
without any kind of training in it or any
Right.
obvious vocabulary in it. People like Damien Hirst, the YBAs, several of them, including Hirst, Tracy Emin, are the two main ones. They start creating things like surfboards with their paintings on. They
Mhm.
The problem with Hirst is it still tends to be quite expensive, but like I've got a
Mhm.
Damien Hirst Beck's beer bottle that I bought for £5, $5 in a
Right.
market, and it's got a spot painting on it, and it feels as though I own a little bit of that art, not the
Mhm.
artist and not the commodity, but a bit of the soul that I
Right.
appreciate the artist was putting into works of art that I could never afford to buy. So there was a
Right.
kind of already I think that what you're doing is there were the kind of beginnings of that to a certain extent by, if you like, popular culture and these people making multiples that anyone could afford or reasonably well off people with a bit of money could afford. And then, with the digital stuff, these people are buying them for what seemed like quite small amounts of money, and they weren't from the typical art world.
Yeah, I mean, and then, I understand the financial value metrics of those of the old guard who, want to create work and keep it scarce and put it on the secondary market and,
Mhm.
you know, add value to it that way or add price point to it that way. And for those that choose that traditional model, that's a path for them,
Yes,
because I'm
absolutely.
not against that either.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
tend to do all of it, right?
yeah.
That's my thing. I'm not limiting myself to anything because I think that by me focusing on the value, the intrinsic value that my creativity adds and building community over time, the original works will always hold their value because the value will be in the community that I've created and it's different tiers of products that people have been able to enter this community through. And just the value that you add through your voice, your presence, and your work,
Mhm.
that will supersede the price metric, but it won't compromise it, you know.
I begin to realize as well why you've done quite a lot of interviews and podcasts like this, and I begin to realize that you're doing that not so much to market yourself, but to again to speak to the community on different levels, as it were. Um, oh,
And it's a need for that in the 21st century because most people in the art world who admire the art world are dominated by 20th century perspective.
absolutely.
Even some of my collectors are like, well, we don't like when you do this and this. It's like, it's okay, but you'll get it in time. In time, you'll get it, but right now you might not get it. But we're in the 21st century and I'm not Picasso or Basquiat and I don't want to be. I want to be in my time. This is my time.
Yeah, people do get caught up in it's because things become classics, and they're not going to lose value once they're seen in history
Right,
as a
right.
classic. But it's so important to have people like you and other artists that I've done podcasts with and curators recently. They're thinking beyond the horizon, so they're doing what the rest of us would love to do if we could, if that makes
I
sense.
mean, if you look at what Picasso did when he, introduced
Absolutely.
the paintings with the five prostitutes,
Yep.
that was totally rejected. When you look at what Henry Matisse did, right, it was
Yep.
totally rejected in France, right? And
Yep.
so, you know, you just have to be
Absolutely.
and let your community find you where you're at and focus on the value more than the price. And if you focus on increasing the intrinsic value, the fiat currency price will come.
Yeah. And if you're producing what you yourself believe in, it has a magic of its own anyway because it's made sincerely from the heart.
Yeah.
So what gap were you trying to close when you founded Artonomics, and what specifically were artists not being taught? I mentioned that a little bit earlier on, but maybe you
Mhm.
could develop that a little bit. How did you feel that this could become like a toolbox, one might call it, for
Mhm.
artists?
Yeah, for me, it's a two-part thing. When I entered this gallery to museum pipeline in 2020, I remember in March doing my first painting and asking people who I knew who were painters and sculptors, like, how do you approach a gallery, right? What do you need? And they was like, oh, okay, you need artist statement, bio, CV, inventory report. So, oh, what's the artist statement? What's a bio? Okay, first person, third person. CV is this. Okay, I don't have a CV, but I've published a lot of things and did spoken word performances and, article. Okay, I can do that. And then the inventory report, I'll build that out as I go. And within 6 months, I was signed to a gallery in New York, New Orleans, you know, and selling work. And these people who had went to Yale MFA, Parsons Schools of Design, Chicago Institute of Art, Merlin Institute of Contemporary Art, they're asking me, like, how are you selling all this art, right? And this is, and it was so many people were asking me, and they would tell me, like, look, I'll teach you technique if you teach me business. And so this curriculum is being curated out of just my lived experience in the fine art, fashion, film, publishing, public speaking, community, NFT, all these different industries in which I operate my studio practice, from Warner Brothers to the Queen of England to the, Blackstone. But what I realized is that these people who are formally educated in MFA programs in schools of designs, they have no clue on how to operate this way. And
Mhm.
so this was really something that I did to create an infrastructure so that when my peers asked me a question, I could just refer them to a book or to a series of podcasts or a series of, digital videos, that they can digest and implement. And then I can get feedback from them to tweak, because I also did some nonfiction, fictional books too, because some people learn better from stories, and I want to develop those into comic books, graphic novels, and animation series. But to me, it just came out of my peers in the art world who are teachers and professors who don't really want to be teachers and professors. They really want to exhibit their art and make a living from just creativity, but they just don't know the business.
Yeah, I remember uh, again, probably something like 2005, 6, 7, when the economy was still pretty good, pre-recession, the contemporary art market was booming exponentially. Everything was good. And I reached out to one of London's art colleges, I won't say which, and they thought it was a really good idea. I said, look, I've got these master's students who've studied art history. Some of them have been studio artists as well, but they want to learn about business to go, make that their career. How wouldn't it be useful for your final year artists to buddy up with some of my students? So we had a party and they befriended one another, and it was going well for a couple of years. And then one year I said, oh, should we set up this up for next year? And the
Mhm.
art professor, who herself was an artist, turned around and said, oh, I still feel really uncomfortable with this notion that suddenly
Mm,
my artist students are being told how to make money out of their art.
mm,
And it stopped.
right.
It stopped. And
Yeah.
honestly, I know some of those artists and some of the students that work with them. Some of them are still working with them, and their agents, art agents.
Mhm.
Uh, it's just, but there's this weird sort of conservatism that you wouldn't expect in the art world. I mean, I understand the point, i.e., we don't,
Mhm.
artists should think about art, not about money. But, we live in a real world as well.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
and
it
then the
sounds as
thing
though
is,
you're bumping into the same problem.
yeah, the thing is, artists, creatives contribute an invaluable amount of cultural capital to
Definitely.
the human experience through
Yeah.
film, fashion, culinary arts, martial arts, like, and when they cannot sustain their livelihood doing what they love, we have seen intergenerationally how this leads to emotional and mental health issues
Hmm.
because they become depressed about
Hmm.
the bad contract, the bad gallery, the bad accountant, getting back on their taxes. And, so if we truly support the artists, then why not let them be able to make a living out of what they love to do so that they
Mm,
can stay well and they can create from a space of wellness and also retain the equity in their intellectual property, image, and likeness past their lifetime so that they're this because we spend a lot of time away from our children.
yeah.
We miss a lot of birthdays and
Mm,
graduations and soccer games to make the things for you, right?
mm,
To make your spaces more beautiful. And so we want to keep the equity in these things that we create so that our children who didn't get to experience us, they can benefit financially and their children financially and their children financially because of the sacrifices that we made to the human family. And so I think it's criminal. I believe it's criminal and highly immoral to shame artists for wanting to retain equity
mm,
and what comes through them and to make them, to discourage them for
mm,
wanting to be more aware of how they can be efficient in maintaining the business side of their practice, which is directly in the capitalist world, is directly tied into their well-being. Especially in America, we don't get free healthcare and things that,
yeah,
everything costs here.
yeah. And most American states, I mean, the UK now pays resale royalty rights to creative artists, visual artists, but that
Mhm,
that only happened in our law because when we were in Europe, the European Union put ethical pressures on on the
mhm,
UK to do this, and a lot of people in the London art market world they just didn't want it. It's bureaucracy, red tape, and it came in, and no one really cared. Now there's no problem with it at all. And the idea, as you said, is it doesn't just last during the artist's lifetime. So when a work is just to explain to listeners who don't understand this, so that you buy the work of art from Halim himself or from a gallerist representing him, and then if you want to sell it at some point, it's what we call the secondary market. Halim's already used that phrase, and when they're sold, basically it means that when a work is sold for the second time, a percentage of the value, the financial value, goes back to the artist or their estate, and that lasts for something like 60 to 70 years after they die. And that's kind of like the legal side of what you just explained so poetically and beautifully, i.e., your
And then
children. Yeah.
the blockchain technology is an addendum. And
Okay.
so now it's introducing creatives to this new way of adding an extra layer of protection.
Yep.
The contract definitely sets the negotiation, and the blockchain doesn't have to eradicate it, it just strengthens it. And so
Mm.
once these works are registered on a blockchain, it has a digital ledger that creates a provenance that's publicly seen. And also now instead of the 60 to 70-year rule, right, the blockchain can last in perpetuity.
Yeah. So I think what it means is that you build into the blockchain that should the ownership of the blockchain code change, automatically a percentage of any money exchange will go back to the artist or their estate. Is that right?
Exactly. And I think in
That's
the
brilliant.
next 5 to 10 years, as you'll see the world become more familiar with this terminology, tokenization of real world assets. Right now, people just looking at it from a real estate perspective and equity and debt market, but cultural capital, art is definitely a real world asset. And creating that provenance, that title on the blockchain and setting that percentage that you or your estate gets in perpetuity on a resale, that will be an addendum initially to the contract system we have today. But maybe 20 years from now, I think most contracts and titles of real estate and real world assets will be on the blockchain.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. Halem, you've spoken about preferring self-financing for-profit models over traditional non-profit fundraising that we might associate with the arts, if you like, including your equity and advisor role with Justice Served Coffee, the
Mhm.
organisation. Why does that distinction matter so much to you? I guess some people might find it kind of counterintuitive that an artist actually prefers the you know, you're not ashamed of making money basically and using for-profit models rather than relying on crowdfunding and fundraising. Maybe you could just talk a bit more about
Yeah,
that.
I can't see the logic in attaching shame to making money when we have a trillionaire in the world. Like, and it's not like you're making money from a product that's destructive to people's health,
Hmm.
morality. As I stated, I have children, right? I have children. I have people in my family who I love who are highly fiscally irresponsible, who depend on me here and there. And I like doing for them. But most importantly, in the United States of America, we don't have like universal health care.
Hmm.
And I don't have like a 401k. I don't work
Hmm.
for a company. I'm a self enterprise. That means
Hmm.
I have to, put up for my own retirement, right? And we're headed to a state where they say Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid will run out. And before I'm a senior citizen, I'm
Hmm.
45 now. So it's just like being humanly responsible to make money. I think a person should only be ashamed from earning money is when they're doing it in a way that's harmful to themselves and others intentionally. But contributing to the human family intergenerational wellness community and building infrastructure and community around that, I don't see any sense of being ashamed and
Hmm.
encouraging other creatives, entertainers, athletes. Because in America now uh, we have it, it's legal now for college athletes to monetize their image and likeness, right? And so simultaneously, we have a huge financial illiteracy problem. And
Hmm.
so we are creating in social media, internet, streaming, all these different technologies, AI, blockchain have created insurmountable amount of opportunities for people to engage in self-enterprise, to create value and to generate revenue. And they need to learn how to protect, scale, and estate plan their intellectual property, their image, and their likeness. Until we get free universal health care, and Elon Musk said in 5 10 years, there will be no more labor. I don't think artists will stop making music and art and plays. So I think we'll continue to work with other people who do wage labor. They may not work anymore, but I think we'll still work. And
Well, and they then have more leisure to enjoy what you're doing.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So
So when you work with an artist on pricing for the first time, where do you start? What's the first question you ask them? Because my students, one of
mhm,
the difficult questions is, you know, if I'm an art advisor or working with an artist as an agent,
mhm,
how do I set a price on their work, which they've never. I mean, I remember going into a student show once, and I really liked the work, and I asked the artist, how much do you want for this? And they literally looked embarrassed and said, I've never ever thought about that. And I said, well, how much do you think it's worth? You must be very proud of your work.
mhm.
How much would you spend on a meal or a theatre ticket or an arena concert? And where do you think that fit? So we got a really interesting discussion going about that in the end. There was a group of artists and around me and some of my students, and we were talking about how you do this. What is the equivalent experience, if you like? And of course, art will continue. Most art will actually continue forever and then be passed on to the next generation. How do you have that conversation with an artist?
Yeah, for me, one of my mentors taught me that we take what is known to discover that what is unknown.
Hmm.
And so we have a known market for the arts. And we have this technology known as artificial intelligence that I want artists to not be so afraid of, not in the perspective of creating art, but in understanding business, right? And so what we can do is take what is known in the marketplace for artists with a similar like experience in the market, exhibition history. You take your time, your production costs, the size, the mediums. the stage you're at in your career, and you use these known factors to come up with this unknown price that you're seeking. And nothing is absolute in the art world. There's no one standard, but you can use your own intelligence in combination with artificial intelligence to do your due diligence to find out your comparables, career stage, production, time value, cost of materials, your mediums, your size of your piece. And then once you get that at that stage of your career, what's comparable with other people in the marketplace at that stage of your career, then you could come up with a price point per square inch, or if you in anywhere else outside the United States, per square meter, centimeter. And and then once you have that, then you can build out from that. And as you go from, emerging to mid-career to establish, your prices will evolve with those same variables that you've been able to develop with your own intelligence research in combination with artificial intelligence. And for me, I began on my own with my own dope using that formula. And then once I was fortunate to sign with the gallery in New York City, they created a pricing point for me. And I've just always just let the gallery in New York lead that and have that pricing consistency. That's another thing. You get with this gallery in New York, and if this is your primary dealer who's developing, your CV and fully invested in your career, then when you don't have an exclusive agreement, you get with a gallery in Paris and Dubai and, Liechtenstein and Los Angeles, you always establish at the beginning, these are my prices,
Hmm.
right? This is an issue I had with Halcyon Gallery in London. They
Hmm.
shipped over 50 of my works. We were supposed
Hmm.
to have a show, right? This when they moved their new location. This was like 22. They moved their location from one side of the street to the other side of the street on I forgot the name, New Bond Street
It's Bond
and
Street, which is the
Bond Street.
most expensive real estate in the world.
Right. And the reason why we never did the show was because they wanted me, and great people. I love the team at Halcyon Gallery, Simon in particular, met all the owners, but
Hmm.
they wanted me to raise my prices.
Hmm.
And I said, no, I can't do that. I can't allow my work to be inflated in price beyond what my original gallery in America set for me. And we just never did the show. They sent the works back after negotiating for like 2 or 3 years. But you have to understand, the integrity of maintaining uniformity in your pricing.
Yeah, so you felt that this was the right price and that they were inflating that price. And it didn't, it was wrong to, it was basically ethically wrong to ask someone like me to come in and spend that kind of money on it when you had considered that this is what it's worth. That's how much I'm selling it for.
And it wasn't, to me, it wasn't a right or wrong. It was
Yeah.
integrity to my original dealer,
Yeah.
who, when I had no CV,
I see. Yeah.
right, gave me a free studio in New
Yeah.
York City,
Yeah.
gave me an apartment in New York City, gave me a check for 25,000 as an advance. So if this is what this dealer says my market is, and this is the one that's developing me all the way to hopefully the museum solo exhibition,
Yeah.
right? Integrity and loyalty to him
Yeah.
and his
Yeah.
program.
Yeah. That's
Even
because,
if I felt the people in London were right,
yeah.
I
No,
may
you're right.
have agreed with them.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, yeah, it's just dealing ethically with everybody who's helping you in your career,
Mhm.
basically.
Exactly.
No, so that's a big problem, I think. Well, obviously, the a good example, the obvious example of that is when a living artist for the first time, a work of theirs is what we call flipped at auction. So it's bought in a
Hmm.
gallery before they get big. They suddenly get really big, and you sell it for a big profit from what you spent in the gallery, and then the gallery and the artist, it creates a problem for them because people suddenly see another extra figure on the end after the dollar sign in the way their
Hmm.
work's being valued, and everyone gets very confused about how much should I be spending on this.
Right.
So and it creates kind of anarchy, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
there's
I
not
think
much you,
that
yeah,
it's important for artists like me who understand the business and who can articulate their ideas outside of the canvas
Mm,
to use their media platforms to articulate to their community, not their collectors, their
mm.
community.
Yeah.
It's curators, it's dealers, it's appraisers, it's insurers, it's collectors, it's followers, it's subscribers, right? You have to
Hmm.
stay, well, I choose to stay in communication daily with
Hmm.
my community so they can understand the vision
Yeah.
and that what they invested into, whether they bought sneaker or streamed a song on Apple Music or watched a podcast on YouTube or bought
Mm.
an original painting for $50,000, right?
Mm.
That we're staying on brand,
Yeah.
right? This
They're all
community is staying on brand.
so it's just an expanded what we might on business terms we might say we've just expanded the stakeholders. The nature of the stakeholders doesn't just mean the people who are investing money
Right,
into something. It's there are other stakeholders who are affected by your art.
right.
Uh, in the same way as a business is affected by or nature is affected by the building of a new factory.
Because you have to
Trees.
understand
Yeah.
in old times, 20th century thinking, the artist could only make money on a cash transfer for ownership of the piece of art.
Yeah.
But now every artist who has a social media is a media company, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're creating community and you have a multidisciplinary practice like me, so I can go from poetry, spoken word, public speaking, podcast, short story writing, novellas, fiction, nonfiction, curriculum, paintings, sculptures, sneakers, hoodies, rap albums, books. So in creating this community, just in having the data that shows the analytics and engagement and the emails from the newsletter, these become monetizable assets. Just your
Mhm.
community, as we just saw with Google attempting to buy Spirit Airlines data for 10 million, right?
Mm.
Hundreds of thousands of emails of former employees and customers. So as artists are developing this community, your community becomes a monetizable asset through your analytics and your engagement on your media platforms and through your newsletters, right? And so that's not the only way in which artists generate revenue anymore. It's just like through you buying a painting. So everyone in the ecosystem plays a part and has an importance.
Yeah, and I love what you said about AI. That I mean, AI, so long as you can afford, so long as you've got a smartphone and could get web data, AI can act as your assistant again for people who, underprivileged people. So long as they've got this, if they learn to use AI
Mhm.
properly, that for free, they're getting they can ask it. If anyone asks me, why am I
Mhm.
asking this amount of money for this painting that I've just made? At least I
Mhm.
can rationalize it with the help of AI. I can say, because I've fed in how much my materials cost. I mean, in some ways, it
Mhm.
goes back to the earlier start where the contracts for early Renaissance artists, Botticelli and so on, they were
Mhm.
listing how much the gold and the ultramarine and the pigments would cost. Then you start getting this is what I was going to lead on to you. What is the X factor, which is the artist? Because those contracts suddenly start saying, and this happens with Botticelli famously in the 15th century, they start saying, and we want the artist's hand, only the artist, not the studio, to paint the
Mhm.
faces, the figures, and so on. So suddenly the artist becomes an asset, a kind of financial asset, not just the materials. So I guess when you're putting this into AI, how do you get AI to understand this, who Halim Flowers is and what
Mhm.
standing you have in the art world? Do you see what I'm saying? That there's an X factor
Yeah.
in the value
So
of art.
for me, this was the second part to the question you asked earlier about
Yeah.
the Artonomics. The second part, we're creating the Artonomics
Mm.
Partial Capital Index. And so just as Forbes measures the net worth value through financial metrics of assets and liabilities, we measure the cultural value of creatives and artists and entertainers and
Interesting.
architects. And so we're creating this index so that it's a scored system that's not dependent on a dollar amount, but cultural influence, cultural adoption, cross-cultural, commercial conversion. We have 7 different metrics by which we measure an individual's cultural value, and this will have use case scenarios in the public and the private sector. So if a mayor or a governor wants to create a creative district or, invest in public art, instead of looking at a creative's follower count, right, or net worth, right, metrics or financial, statements, you can look at the cultural influence that they have in a community, locally, regionally, nationally, globally, right? And so this is important for us because there is no system in place to measure cultural capital. Though UNESCO, well, WIPO said that $10 trillion were invested in 2025 in intangible assets, but there's no system to measure that value. And so with the Artonomics Cultural Capital Index, this is what we're doing so that artists can understand their cultural footprint sometimes can be more valuable than their financial footprint, right? And just because you
Absolutely.
may not have a revenue at a price point doesn't mean you may not have value at a
Yeah.
value point.
When you speak to people working in the financial world, do they understand that there is such a thing as cultural value?
Yeah, I'm just leaving Martha's Vineyard, and one day I had a talk with an event that was sponsored by Visa, and the next day by UBS, and they just were saying that we've never heard an artist articulate it this way. We've never we've never had an artist who had an understanding of financial engineering, equity and debt instruments, and the monetary supply, the difference between fiscal and monetary policy, and the securitization of real world assets to explain it in a way in which cultural capital has value and how public private sector all use cultural value to make their outcomes more efficient. Right? The greatest what? The greatest currency in the world is attention. It's no coincidence that our president is an entertainer,
Yeah.
a reality show star. Right? He understands cultural value. He creates
Mhm.
caps and
Yep.
slogans, right? This is all branding, right? And
Mhm.
so, but people are stuck in 20th century politics, public
Mhm.
sector. They're being left behind because they're losing the war in messaging, because they don't understand the value of culture, right? And so, and it's important for people like me who are what they consider left brain, right brain, to create this index not as a competitive index to something like the Forbes, but as an addendum, right? To strengthen it, because cultural capital is intrinsic value. And I always say it cannot be fully measured and captured by fiat currency.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our students use a subscription database called Artifacts, or one word, and that measures. It has league tables, like you've probably
Hmm.
heard of things like Art Price that rank
Hmm.
artists by their financial turnover, only based on auction
Hmm.
prices. But Artifacts is really interesting because it doesn't use money; it uses what they call fame, which
Hmm.
is connected to what you've just said about brands and so on, and attention. That's one of their
Hmm.
watchwords. So basically, an artist will change in their ranking if they have a solo show for the first time, they get more points. If they have a
Hmm.
solo show in a particular gallery which has its own point system, they get
Hmm.
more points. If they have a show with an artist higher up the league table, they that artist attracts points to them. So
Right.
it's a fascinating kind of theoretical idea about, and it's basically the guy who created it, Marit Claassen, he's in Germany. He he basically drew his ideas from a kind of Marxist view of society and value.
Hmm.
You know, he
Can you
just
send that
finds,
to me too after the
yeah,
interview? Yeah,
yeah.
I
No,
want to I want
it's
to check
very
that
very
out.
interesting. Well, I'll also send you where you're ranked on that, and
Yeah,
I can
yeah,
send you a
send that to
screen.
me.
Yeah, I'll send you a
Yeah,
screenshot of
because
it.
in my
'Cause-
in my index, I'm ranked at 55 out of
okay,
100, right?
yeah,
And so it shows like there's no biasness in it, and that it's so refreshing to me because it's like, oh, okay, I've done like art for the Queen, exhibit at the Venice Biennale, and
yeah.
but I still have a great way to go, and
So you have
I'm
your
not
own art.
discouraged by that.
You have your own artist. What you have your Halim Flowers Artist 100 index, and you're
Yeah,
55.
Yeah,
That's
so it's like the 7 factors is cultural influence, cultural adoption,
yeah,
cultural lineage value, cultural penetration in the global markets,
yeah,
commercial conversion impact, and cultural longevity, and originality and attribution. And I didn't even seek to like dispute it. I didn't even argue with it because I really want the system to develop. And as
yeah.
I keep accomplishing things, I'll keep plugging it into the system and to, but to me, it's not even about my score. It's just, keeping the index with integrity.
And is that an online index, or
No, it's private for now.
you just keep it for yourself? That's interesting.
No,
Yeah.
it'll be public soon.
Oh,
We'll be releasing it soon.
yeah.
I maybe I had some conversation when you mentioned when I was at the financial conference, financial event yesterday in Martha's Vineyard, and I was explaining to people the difference between like you see these rappers and like the Muhammad Ali estate, they sell their catalog, right, for
Hmm.
$100 million, and people think that's good. And I always say, well, David Bowie, he used 10 years of his revenue from his a period in his catalog as a underwriting securitized asset to access the 50 million in pounds, right? And so he keeps the equity after the 10-year revenue share. His estate can underwrite his catalog over and over again. They keep the equity in it. And the lady who was hosting the event, who owned the house, she said, it's interesting you referenced that because I bought some of those bonds and I remember they matured, right? And so, but I've never met an artist who ever understood it.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'm aware of the time now. So just a couple of final questions. If you were advising an artist 5 years into their career, because I'm just thinking, I'm hoping that I know that artists listen to these podcasts, and it they will be asking for something really useful for them listening to this. So if you were advising an artist 5 years into their career, still emerging, to use that definition, who still doesn't feel financially secure, still having to do other kind of jobs they don't really want to do to earn a living, what would your first 3 steps be for them? Your recommendations for them to aim towards.
My first step would be to see yourself as a business
Hmm.
and not as an artist.
Yep.
And even as an artist, you must develop multiple streams of income from your work. So right now you do your work and then you work a job on the side. So the goal is to develop your art practice into multiple streams of revenue so that you can eliminate the job, right? And so begin to see yourself as a business. Definitely use human being peers who are already doing it as a source of inspiration or reference. Study them obsessively,
Mm,
obsessively. And then also make use of AI to go back and forth as, I guess you could say, it's like a think tank. Form a think
yep.
tank with these different, from DeepSeek to Gemini to
Yep.
ChatGPT to Claude. Form a think tank. Just keep copying and pasting it from here to here to find. But you must study business obsessively
Yes. It's
and
it.
find ways to take a painting and transfer it from a painting to a cap, to a lecture, to a book,
Hmm.
to a curriculum, to doing art for album covers for artists,
Hmm.
doing merchandise like a cause, right?
Hmm.
Collaborating with different brands. So, and for me, it's like I would tell them to study me. Like, study me. Like, I'm somebody that was incarcerated for 22 years,
Hmm.
right? So, study me. I've done things with Warner Brothers, with Apple, but also like learn the power of your community, meaning that
Yeah.
this deal that I got with Warner Brothers through I did a talk at Apple in DC. The lady from the Apple store in San Francisco liked it, had me to come to San Francisco. Do the talk at San Francisco, I end up sitting next to a guy who was one of the owners of the Golden State Warriors, right? And then he introduced me to all of the owners of the Golden State Warriors, and 4 or 5 of them started to collect my art. But one of the majority owners, Kevin Sujara, was the first Asian American to head a major film studio, Warner Brothers. And he was no longer the CEO and the chairman, but he introduced me to the new CEO and chairman who got me into the Warner Brothers deal, right? And so
Yeah,
I have received a tremendous amount of value add just through my community of
yeah,
collectors, right?
yeah. I guess we'd probably use the words networking in the way we teach that, but I think it's
Mhm.
networking is it's just become such a kind of corporate word that I
Right.
love the idea of keep coming back to the community, a social community. I did a podcast a couple of podcasts ago with a couple who now they just have their own salon in their house in North
Mhm.
London. And they literally invite, anyone who's interested. So they basically are still selling artist work, but they exhibit it in their house. And they invite people around to the house. They have drinks. They have a garden. They have musicians that they welcome in. And I've been to a couple of them now, and they're just such interesting people there. But they're from all levels of the community who just
Mhm.
basically have one interest, which is in art and culture and listening to music and just
Right.
enjoying one another's society. So that's very important, not just to sort of stay stuck in your studio and not be
Right.
a part of your community. I think that's so important.
And communicating with your community daily
Yeah,
on social media.
yeah. Walking the dog,
Because
having coffee,
peop
saying hello to everyone.
yeah, because people they understand that you are a business.
Yeah,
They get an opportunity to hear and see your vision and different things you want to expand into. And when they are happen to be in their home and they have your painting with them and some like, oh, where do you get that? Oh, different this and that. When they, oh yeah, I'm into music. I represent some artists. We looking for some artwork for these album covers. We gonna do these vinyl
yeah,
releases, right? And so these
yeah.
opportunities, oh yeah, he's yeah, he or she, they're expanding their business. Yeah, they're, so you get those opportunities when you stay in connection with your community and
But
share
you're
with
not
them
going
your
to get them
vision.
by just putting yourself in an ivory tower. You've got to get
No.
out, talk to people. I call it serendipity. It's this wonderful word about a chance meeting. And many
Hmm.
of my alumni, I say, "How did you get that job?" And they say, "Oh, I just went to this, got chatting to this person, and they got increasingly interested in what I did, and they asked me to come for an interview." So, Halim, just in terms of where can people find out more about you? I mean, I can put I'll put your Artonomics. I think you've got an Instagram for a start. If I
Yeah.
if I put a list of all these in the literature that goes with the podcasts, but maybe you could just run off a few things yourself about how people can find out more about Artonomics and what you do.
Yeah, definitely. All links are on Instagram
Yep.
at Halim Flowers, HalimFlowers. Also at TikTok, same handle, just put the middle initial A in between the Halim and the flowers. LinkedIn, YouTube, Autonomics 101,
Hmm.
and Facebook, Halim Flowers. And from there, you can access the links to my books. I published 17 books. My gallery published the art table book. You can find a link to my podcast, my audio podcast. You can find the links to all of my albums and my singles, and also to all the galleries that represent me throughout the world, from Dubai to Liechtenstein to New York and Palm Beach. And I will be having a painting experience at a prominent ski race in Austria. It's the most prominent ski race in one of the most prominent ski races in Europe. I cannot pronounce the name, but if you give me one second, because I know this is your European audience and some of them may be there,
Oh,
and I'll be there.
the
Yeah, I'll be there.
majority
It's,
of
it's
my
called
listeners are
the Kits Race Club, and it'll be at Kitzbühel, Austria, January 2027. It's called the
fantastic.
Honeycomb Weekend, and it's a prominent ski race there in Austria. I'll
Wow.
be there, with limited edition ski suits and artwork on exhibit in collaboration with my gallery that represents me, Linden Platz in Liechtenstein.
That's great. By the way, the stats on who downloads this podcast, the majority are USA, followed by
Mhm.
UK, and people from all
Okay.
over the world. But look, Halim, I don't know how to thank you for sharing your. I mean, it's just I'm sure people have said this to you before, but I can feel your soul and your vibes and your art coming across the ether, and I
Thank
hope
you.
people listening to this podcast will feel the same way. And I, on behalf of them, I'd just like to thank you very, very much for, for doing something with a life that didn't look worth living at one point, I'm sure, or for many points. And I think that's the one thing I've taken away from this, that, you know, however bad life seems, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. I mean, that's
Right.
into my mind. So
And
just thanks very much for sharing all your ideas with
thank you.
us.
Thank you for having me. And my closing statement is the 20th century artist was taught to make work. The 21st century artist has to understand how to build an economy around building a community around the work.
Excellent.